Göbekli Tepe turned out to be what you think it might have been, where are the metal tools? Where are the writing, the examples of writing?
Everyone thought Göbekli Tepe was just the world's oldest temple, until now. In 2025, a discovery shook the core of archaeology. A sealed vault, buried beneath the site, contained something so advanced that it shouldn't exist. Ancient writings that hint at a forgotten intelligence. Structures that defy history. And one artifact officials won't dare show the public. This isn't just any dig site anymore. It's ground zero for a truth humanity was never meant to find. And what lies beneath changes everything we thought we knew. Let's rewind to where the mystery first began. Because Göbekli Tepe's story isn't only old, it's strange. And the deeper you dig, the more questions start to surface. The legend of Göbekli Tepe. Tucked away in the dusty hills of southeastern Turkey, near the Syrian border, lies a place so old, so mysterious, that it's quietly reshaping everything we thought we knew about the beginnings of civilization. This isn't a site you stumble upon in your average history book. It's not a tourist hotspot filled with camera flashes and gift shops. But archaeologists are calling it one of the most important discoveries in human history. And for good reason. Göbekli Tepe, which means pot-belly hill in Turkish, is believed to be the world's oldest known monumental structure. We're talking about a place built over 11,000 years ago, sometime between 10,000 and 13,000 before the Common Era. That's long before the Egyptian pyramids, long before Stonehenge, and even long before people supposedly knew how to farm. Here's where it gets more interesting. Only about 10% of Göbekli Tepe has been excavated. The rest? Still buried under layers of earth, waiting to be unearthed. And if what's already been found is any indication, the deeper archaeologists dig, the more this ancient puzzle grows. The first serious discoveries happened in the 1990s, when German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt took a closer look at what was once thought to be a simple mound. What he found blew the doors off conventional history. He uncovered massive T-shaped stone pillars, some standing nearly 20 feet tall and weighing up to 10 tons, arranged in large circular formations. Each one was carefully carved with animals, symbols, and strange humanoid shapes. Snakes slither across the surfaces. Foxes, vultures, and scorpions appear again and again. There's even what some believe is the earliest attempt at representing mythological or spiritual ideas. And yet, there's no writing, no wheels, no metal tools, no domesticated animals. These were hunter-gatherers, people who were supposed to be too primitive to organize large-scale construction. So how did they manage it? And, more importantly, why? The most accepted theory is that Göbekli Tepe was some kind of ceremonial or religious site. Some call it the world's first temple. The idea is that various groups of nomadic people may have gathered here for rituals, maybe even for seasonal festivals, funerals, or spiritual events. But even then, there are questions. Why would people go to such extremes, carving and lifting giant stones just for ceremony? And how did they cooperate on such a massive scale without a central government or even farming to support a large population? Klaus Schmidt had a bold idea. He believed that sites like Göbekli Tepe weren't built after agriculture developed. They may have actually inspired it. Think about it like this. A large group of people comes together for a sacred event. They need food. They need shelter. They need a reason to stick around. Over time, this need could have pushed them to plant seeds, build storage areas, and eventually settle down. In other words, religion or ritual may have given birth to farming, the other way around. Well, another layer of mystery could be that the site was deliberately buried. Around 8,000 before the Common Era, someone, or perhaps let's say many people, decided to cover it all up. They didn't abandon it and let the earth reclaim it naturally. To this day, no one knows exactly why. Was it part of a ritual? Was it a way to close a chapter in their culture? Or did something happen that made them want to erase what they'd built? What's certain is that Göbekli Tepe forces us to rethink what we know about early humans. These weren't mindless wanderers scraping by in caves. They were organized, creative, and capable of incredible engineering, all before the invention of writing or the use of metal. And yet, for all its importance, Göbekli Tepe remains a place shrouded in questions. The more we learn, the more it dares us to challenge everything we thought we knew about where we come from. So we've walked through the stones and dust of Göbekli Tepe's physical past, but there are deeper questions that are still circling. What does it all mean? Well, that's where the real maze begins, because everyone, from scientists to storytellers, has their own take. Just like we mentioned, scholars see the site as a religious center, a place for rituals, ceremonies, or seasonal gatherings. But here's the strange thing. There's almost no sign that people lived there permanently. No homes, no fire pits, no trash heaps. It's as if people traveled long distances to meet at this site, did what they came to do, and then left. Which again goes against everything we thought we knew. Usually, large monuments come after agriculture because you need a stable food supply to support big labor projects. But Göbekli Tepe suggests that maybe it worked the other way around. Maybe shared beliefs pulled people together first, and the farming followed. Now, that's the grounded view. But then, there is another theory that is a bit colorful. Some believe Göbekli Tepe was built with help from ancient aliens. Yeah, seriously. They argue the precision and scale of the construction would have been impossible for Stone Age people without outside help. Others think it's proof of a long-lost advanced civilization, one wiped out in a cataclysm and forgotten by history. These ideas don't come with strong evidence, but they've definitely caught the public's imagination. You'll find them in books, YouTube documentaries, and even some TV specials that run during the Ancient Mysteries hours. Part of what fuels these fringe theories is the mystery that still surrounds the site. Most of it is still buried. And for a site that's potentially the oldest monumental complex on Earth, that's a whole lot of unknown. There are also questions about why it was intentionally buried. You see, archaeologists believe the people who used Göbekli Tepe actually covered it up with dirt and debris. That's not something you see often in ancient history. Usually, sites are abandoned and left to erode over time. But this was deliberate, like they were trying to hide it, and nobody really knows why. Naturally, when science doesn't have clear answers, myths step in. Fringe theorists paint the site as a portal, a map of the stars, or even a coded message left behind by a forgotten species. The internet is filled with speculation about ancient technology, energy lines, and connections to Atlantis. The media, of course, eats this up, not always in a bad way. The more bizarre the theory, the more attention the site gets, which has helped bring more eyes and funding to archaeological research. But it also blurs the line between what's evidence-based and what's entertainment. Now here's where things get interesting. What if none of these theories are right? What if the mainstream view is missing something? And what if the myths, despite being exaggerated, are pointing toward a real mystery we haven't quite grasped yet? That's the tension hanging over Göbekli Tepe. We have physical evidence, expert theories, wild speculations, and a whole lot of questions. And yet, despite all we know and don't know, the site remains mostly silent. But while the old debates kept circling, something quietly shifted. In 2025, new findings began to surface, and they're changing how we look at everything Göbekli Tepe was and wasn't. The 2025 breakthrough new discoveries. In early 2025, something happened at Göbekli Tepe that no one saw coming. For decades, archaeologists and historians had stared at those mysterious stone circles and towering T-shaped pillars, trying to make sense of it all. Most agreed it was likely a ritual center, like we said earlier, built by nomadic hunter-gatherers who would come and go. It was never thought of as a place where people lived full-time. But then, the ground gave up a new set of secrets, and everything changed. As the new excavation season got underway, a team digging around the outskirts of the already exposed enclosures stumbled upon something completely unexpected. Remnants of living quarters. Not just scattered stones or vague outlines in the dirt, but actual signs of people staying there. Hearths, storage pits, foundation layouts. There was even a series of flat, smoothed areas likely used as workspaces. This discovery immediately set off a wave of excitement and disbelief. Up until now, no one had solid proof that the builders of Göbekli Tepe had lived on site. It was assumed that since the area lacked signs of farming, housing, or long-term settlement, the site must have been more like a sacred pit stop, a kind of spiritual rest area along ancient migration routes. But what was now emerging in 2025 didn't look temporary at all. The living spaces weren't the only surprise. Alongside them, archaeologists uncovered tools like stone blades, scrapers, grinding stones, and the remains of plants and animals. Wheat grasses, legumes, gazelle bones, and bird feathers all pointed to people, not only preparing food here, but processing it in ways that hint at a settled lifestyle. Grinding stones suggest possible food preparation, hinting at a longer stay. In other words, this wasn't camping. This was home. That idea alone is enough to shake the foundations of what we thought we knew about human history. If Göbekli Tepe really did support a permanent or semi-permanent population, it rewrites the timeline for when people began living in one place and how early humans transitioned from roaming bands to structured communities. And that's only part of the 2025 revelation. As the team expanded their work beyond the original excavation zones, ground-penetrating radar scans revealed something almost unbelievable. At least 15 more enclosures were still buried beneath the surface, largely untouched. Some of these could be even older than the ones already exposed, potentially dating back 15,000 years. That puts them far beyond the era of domesticated crops or metal tools into a time when most of the world still lived in caves or open plains. So far, over 200 new standing stones have been identified. Massive slabs, shaped and placed with careful precision. These aren't random boulders, they're purpose-built monuments, many arranged in circular or oval enclosures similar to the earlier ones. In total, researchers have now confirmed at least 15 new megalithic temples across the broader site. And the truth, we've still only scratched the surface. Less than 10% of Göbekli Tepe has been fully excavated. The bulk of it remains underground, preserved beneath layers of time, waiting to be uncovered. And that might take up to or more than 150 years to be fully excavated. It's not an exaggeration to say that every shovel of dirt could bring another game-changing discovery. The 2025 breakthrough didn't just add a few more facts to the story of Göbekli Tepe, it literally shifted the whole narrative. For years, the site had been boxed in by assumptions that it was a temple complex, that the builders were nomadic, that it wasn't a place of permanent life. But now, we have to think differently. The signs of daily living, the tools, the food remains, and the vast number of hidden structures all point to something far more advanced than anyone expected from people of that time. What we're looking at might not just be the oldest monumental site in the world. It could be among the earliest known communities, built long before we believed such a thing was possible. And if that's true, yeah, what else have we been getting wrong? Rewriting history, what the evidence means. So let's take a step back and really think about what's happening here. For decades, archaeologists believed that Göbekli Tepe was mainly a spiritual site, a kind of ancient pilgrimage spot. You know, a place where small bands of hunter-gatherers would meet up, worship, perform rituals, and then go their separate ways. That was the story. It made sense for a while. After all, the site didn't show obvious signs of long-term living. No houses, no streets, no kitchens. Just towering stone pillars carved with animals and abstract symbols. But all of that started to shift with the 2025 breakthrough. What researchers uncovered changes more than a few footnotes in dusty textbooks. This wasn't just a place people passed through. It looks more and more like some of them stayed. And that's where things start to get really intriguing. If Göbekli Tepe wasn't just a religious center, but also a living space, then we have to rethink how we define the birth of civilization. The long-standing assumption has been that farming came first, that humans settled down to grow crops and raise livestock, and only then did they start building complex societies like temples, governments. But what if we've had it backwards all along? What if the need to come together, whether for spiritual reasons, community bonding, or some shared purpose came first, and agriculture was simply a result of that? What if places like Göbekli Tepe were the catalyst for early humans to settle and develop more reliable food sources? It's less casual. The evidence seems to lean in that direction. And when you look at the site's design, it only adds more weight to that theory. This wasn't some haphazard construction project by a group of wanderers tossing rocks together. The layout shows advanced planning. Each circle of pillars appears carefully aligned, possibly with astronomical or seasonal significance. The use of symmetry and repetition is clear. These weren't people fumbling in the dark. They had ideas about space, design, and purpose, and they etched into them in stone architecture. However, the wild thing is that this happened before agriculture, before pottery, before metal tools. Göbekli Tepe is older than the wheel, older than writing, and way older than the Egyptian pyramids. Yet the architecture is on a massive scale. Those pillars weigh tons, and some stand over 16 feet tall. This was no weekend project. What is even more surprising is the level of cooperation this kind of building would have required. To carve, transport, and raise those stones, people had to organize. They had to communicate clearly, assign roles, and work as a team over long periods. That kind of social coordination usually shows up in farming societies. But these folks were technically still foragers. No farms, no cities. Just people figuring things out together. Now, adding in the recent finds is signs of food processing, tool making, and possible early animal domestication. And here, the picture gets clearer. Göbekli Tepe wasn't only about worship. It might have been one of the first places where humans tried living as a community, even if just temporarily. They may have returned seasonally or stayed for extended stretches, but the roots of settlement were already there. And the big question is, this changes our timeline. It shifts the moment when civilization began. We now have to ask, did people gather to worship because they lived together? Or did they start living together because they wanted to worship? Göbekli Tepe seems to suggest the latter, and that flips the old model on its head. This site, once thought to be an outlier or anomaly, might actually be the missing link in our story. It doesn't erase what we already know about ancient societies. It sort of deepens it. It shows us that the human drive for connection, meaning, and shared experience may have been the true foundation of everything that came after. Farming, cities, governments, culture, all of it. So when we talk about rewriting history, we're not talking about small edits. We're talking about redefining the opening chapter of human civilization. If this site wasn't the exception, but the beginning, then maybe our entire idea of how civilization started needs a second look. The implications: civilization redefined. Right now, we're looking at a discovery that doesn't simply add to our understanding of ancient history, it reshapes it from the ground up. For the longest time, we've leaned on a neat and tidy version of human progress. It's like, once we figured out farming, we stopped roaming, settled down, built homes, raised families, and eventually created towns, temples, governments, and everything that followed. That sequence is what scholars call the Neolithic Revolution, and it has been the cornerstone of our historical timeline. But now, Göbekli Tepe is telling us something very different. Let's start with the most startling implication. Permanent or semi-permanent communities may have existed before agriculture ever entered the scene. That flips the whole story backward. Instead of farming leading to settlements, it now appears that people may have first come together to build, to worship, and to gather, and only afterward felt the need to farm as a way to sustain that new way of life. Think about that for a second. It suggests that the desire to belong, to connect, and to create something bigger than oneself may have been stronger than the push for food security. What drove these early people to carve massive stone pillars, arrange them in circles, and decorate them with art? It wasn't hunger. It had meaning. It was a community. It was a belief. Göbekli Tepe, with its megalithic enclosures and carefully carved symbols, offers solid proof that humans, thousands of years before writing or the wheel, had already formed complex spiritual systems. The level of planning in the site's construction tells us these weren't temporary visitors. There was intention, there was leadership, there was structure. And this leads to another game-changing idea. Hunter-gatherers weren't simple. They didn't live in scattered, loosely organized groups wandering from place to place in survival mode. At least, not all of them. Some may have had social hierarchies, division of labor, and long-term goals. They may have pooled knowledge, coordinated efforts, and built a shared culture strong enough to support projects that took years, maybe decades, to complete. This isn't something we'd expect from people who hadn't even discovered farming yet. What's more is that the people of Göbekli Tepe were using geometric knowledge to lay out the site. Recent studies show that many of the stone pillars were arranged in perfect circles and ovals, revealing a basic grasp of geometry that no one thought hunter-gatherers had. That kind of architectural know-how hints at planning meetings, task delegations, and even basic forms of governance. And there's no actual evidence of domesticated plants or widespread farming during the main period of Göbekli Tepe's construction. That forces us to consider an entirely new sequence. What if the act of gathering, of creating shared sacred spaces, was the reason people began farming in the first place? If people started coming together more regularly to build or worship, they would have needed a more reliable food source nearby. Hunting and foraging would have only taken them so far. And just like that, farming might have emerged out of necessity, not as the spark of civilization, but as its side effect. Suddenly, we're asking questions no one even considered before. How did these early people feed the workers who carved and lifted massive stone pillars? What kind of leadership was in place? Were there roles like builders, artists, planners, or spiritual leaders? Did they trade with neighboring groups? Was there any form of early currency? And what kinds of stories or myths held them together as a community? These aren't questions you usually ask about hunter-gatherers, but Göbekli Tepe makes you ask them. When we start comparing Göbekli Tepe with other megalithic sites scattered across the globe, a fascinating pattern begins to emerge. Even though these sites were built by different cultures in different times and in vastly different environments, the parallels are hard to ignore. It's almost like early humans across continents were tapping into the same instinct to build big, sacred, lasting structures out of stone. Let's start with the one everyone knows, Stonehenge. Located in the English countryside, Stonehenge is a ring of massive standing stones that date back to around 3,000 years before the Common Era. That's roughly 6,000 years after Göbekli Tepe. And yet, there's something hauntingly familiar about it. Both sites feature large circular enclosures, aligned with astronomical patterns. Both were clearly important gathering places, and in both cases, we still aren't totally sure how or why they were built. Coincidence? Maybe. But it also hints at a broader shared tradition of sacred stonework that may have deep roots. Then there's the temples of Malta, like Gantia. These limestone structures are some of the oldest freestanding buildings in the world, dating back to about 3,600 years before the Common Era. Like Göbekli Tepe, the temples of Malta were built long before metal tools were widely used. Their construction required collaboration, planning, and some seriously clever engineering for supposedly primitive people. The temples were likely used for ritual or religious purposes and show signs of artistic decoration. Again, we see architecture being used not for shelter or defense, but for something more symbolic, maybe spiritual, maybe social, or maybe even both. Now, let's shift a bit to Menorca, a small island in the Mediterranean. Here, we find the taulas, T-shaped stone monuments standing in open courtyards, often surrounded by smaller stones in a horseshoe shape. It sounds family, yeah? The layout resembles the enclosures at Göbekli Tepe in more ways than one. The taulas date back to around 1000 before the Common Era, so they're much younger, but they suggest that the idea of using massive stones to shape sacred or ceremonial space didn't die out. It evolved, adapted, and kept showing up. Could the ideas born at Göbekli Tepe, like shared sacred spaces, community organization, symbolic art, and early engineering, have spread to other regions over time? Cultures often influence one another through trade, migration, and storytelling. There's also the matter of architecture. Circular buildings, stone enclosures, and carved motifs didn't start and end at Göbekli Tepe. Similar techniques show up in later sites across the ancient world. Were they independent inventions? Maybe. What's intriguing is that these civilizations didn't try to copy each other. They couldn't have. These cultures were separated by oceans, centuries, and completely different worldviews. But the convergence is what matters. All around the world, people with no contact between them were doing something surprisingly similar. Lifting up stone, shaping space, and telling stories through architecture. It's a global echo of something deeply human. So, what role does Göbekli Tepe play in this larger story? Well, think of it like this. If civilization is a long conversation that humans have been having for thousands of years, Göbekli Tepe is one of the first voices to speak. It's not the only voice, and it didn't say everything, but it said something powerful, and others might have picked up the thread in different ways. That's where its influence becomes more than symbolic. Whether through cultural diffusion, shared human behavior, or parallel development, Göbekli Tepe represents a kind of starting point for how humans began to express ideas through structure. It's about more than rocks. It's about community. The urge to leave something behind that says, we were here and we meant something. Architectural innovation didn't stop at Göbekli Tepe. It moved, it morphed, and you can see its spirit in the stone circles of Britain. These are not isolated flukes. They're chapters in a bigger book. A book that may have started with a group of hunter-gatherers on a dusty hill in southeastern Turkey, carving stone pillars that would one day make the world question everything it thought it knew about the beginning of civilization. What's your take on Göbekli Tepe and its place in our shared history? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. To enjoy more content like this, tap on the next video on your screen.